The theory of knowledge, or epistemology, is a common starting point for many philosophy courses. Philosophers have long been fascinated by what we can and cannot know, and skepticism about the strength of our claims to knowledge has acted as a test to help identify where we can find certainty. To answer the question of whether knowledge exists, we must start by defining knowledge. The Greek philosopher Plato suggested a tripartite definition, a justified true belief. Beliefs can be true or false, but knowledge must be true, and without justification, we have nothing more than an unsubstantiated claim. There are issues with Plato's definition. Edmund Gettier famously used examples, such as a twin hiding under a bed, to demonstrate that our beliefs may be true through luck and our justifications mistaken. But the justified true belief is a good launchpad for us as we try to answer the question, does knowledge exist? So how do we turn a belief into knowledge? Clearly, we need to justify it, to demonstrate its truth. The problem is that rock-solid justification is hard to come by. Skeptics question our claims to knowledge and are apt to lead us into an infinite regress, where we find that every justification can be questioned, and the justifications for the justifications can be questioned ad infinitum. The French philosopher René Descartes decided that the best way to figure out what we know was to become the ultimate skeptic. That's to say, he doubted everything in order to seek out foundational beliefs, which could not be doubted. His so-called method of doubt led him to posit the possibility of an evil demon creating our reality, fooling us into thinking that the world around us exists when in fact it doesn't. Although far-fetched, careful consideration brings one to the conclusion that Descartes was right. We are having experiences, but what is creating those experiences is not directly obvious. Modern versions of this suggest that we could be a brain in a vat, part of some bizarre experiment where nothing is real. Descartes used the method of doubt to establish that if we cannot be sure of the existence of the world, we must seek certainty through introspection. This led him to his classic conclusion, often expressed in Latin, cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. We may not be able to find certainty in experiences, but at the very least, we know that something is thinking about those experiences, and that something is me. For Descartes, the cogito represents a foundational piece of knowledge. The very act of doubting you exist requires you to doubt, and when you doubt, something must be doing the doubting. Even the ultimate skeptic must accept this, and thus the infinite regress is brought to a grinding halt. The problem with the cogito is, where do we go next? Using reason, we've established that we exist, but how do we move from truths of reason to knowledge of the world around us? The Scottish philosopher David Hume argued that reason can only provide analytic truths, or truths that could not be otherwise, and that without experience we are limited to unpicking known truths. For Hume, knowledge of synthetic truths, which could be otherwise, requires us to go out into the world and establish our knowledge a posteriori, or after experience. Hume pointed out that all of our concepts can be traced back to experience. We are born knowing nothing, the so-called tabula rasa, and the world then writes on our blank slates, filling our minds with concepts as we go through life. This is the basis of empiricism, the school of philosophy which looks to experience as the most secure source of knowledge about the world, and counters the rationalist view that reason is the most secure source of knowledge about the world. The trouble with empiricism is that our senses are often fooled. We can be sure that we are having sense experiences in the moment, often referred to as the given by philosophers, but our certainty ends there. As Descartes pointed out, we can't be sure that the world exists and can be trapped in solipsism, sure only of our own existence and nothing else. So what do we know? Reason is limited to introspection and tautologies, things that are true by definition, and the certainty of the given leaves us open to a skeptical attack and the trap of solipsism. Plato argued that knowledge must be certain, but Hume points out that most of our beliefs about matters of fact can never be certain, only probable. All of this seems to suggest that we cannot have certain knowledge beyond the cogito and the given. We know that we are having experiences in the moment, and we know that something is having the experiences. It would seem that certain knowledge of the world does not exist. We can only have beliefs about the nature of reality, beliefs that are probably, but not certainly, true. The implications of this conclusion were carefully considered by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant flipped things around, asking not if our understanding of the world reflects reality, but rather how our minds create our understanding of reality. The Kantian synthesis brings together rationalism and empiricism, suggesting that we know a priori, before experience, certain features of the world as we perceive it, his so-called categories. We can never perceive what Kant called the noumenal, the world out there, reality in and of itself. We can only perceive the phenomenal, the world inside, our reality. But the phenomenal has already been processed by the mind. Thus, in our post-processed world, we experience the only reality which we can ever possibly experience. All talk of the noumenal is conjecture. We have evolved to have our experiences the way in which we have them, and all knowledge lies in the phenomenal, which inevitably reflects our own subjective conceptual schemes. Put simply, we can have knowledge, according to Kant, but it is knowledge of our subjective reality. Objective knowledge of the true structure of reality is beyond us, and we should say nothing of it. But can we really claim that knowledge of the world does not exist and expect to be taken seriously? Some argue that when we ask for certainty in our definition of knowledge, we are using the word knowledge in a manner which ordinary people would consider to be ridiculous. If you ask a friend if he knows what is for dinner, you are not asking for rock-solid certainty which goes beyond the possibility of an evil demon. The great Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said that to use the word in this way is to take the language on holiday. Ordinary language philosophers argue that the muddle over knowledge comes to an end if we stop asking for infallible justifications. Infallibilism leaves us knowing nothing of the world. But when my stomach rumbles, I know that it's time for dinner. To conclude, I would argue that knowledge does exist, either because I can find it in the phenomenal and accept that the noumenal is beyond me, or because I reject the infallibilist language game. The convinced skeptic might point out that I am still left knowing nothing of reality in and of itself, and argue that all epistemology is metaphysics. But I would respond by inviting him for a nice meal and advising him to relax a bit. In the end, we've evolved to experience the world the way that we experience it. And if our experiences were not in some way an accurate reflection of reality, then we would not have survived long enough to be asking if knowledge exists in the first place.